Hello, and welcome to the History of Denmark. I'm Palle Rasmussen. I have a master's degree in history. I'm usually a high school teacher, but I currently briefly work as a guide here at the Hjemsted Oldtids Center, which you saw in the introduction, on this lovely Danish summer day with rain and wind, which also makes the firewood somewhat moist and smoky. There's nothing to do about that except drink a bit of coffee. Not very Iron Age, but I'll do it anyway. So, why the history of Denmark? Well, many of my friends in England, America, and generally abroad has asked me to write a book on the history of Denmark in English, because they say there is no such thing. Now there is. There is the Cambridge History of Denmark. It's a fine book, but it's also expensive, rare, and academic. But I'll never get a book published in English about the history of Denmark. Nobody would fund that. It would never ever sell to more than 150 people. Instead, I'll make a YouTube channel, and if 150 people watch it, I'm happy. I don't have the editing skills, or recording skills even, or the camera equipment of people like Lloyd Lindybage. I can rant with him, if necessary. I don't have as many weapons as Matt Easton. I can't edit like Metatron. I don't think you're noble ones either. I don't have a chair of wisdom like Indy Nidell. I'm just me. But I will do a history of Denmark inspired by my Mike Duncan's podcast, The History of Rome. Because there is none. I'm also a Viking reenactor and has been a Viking reenactor for years. This year I'll miss most of the markets, all of them in fact, because I'll be going to Greenland to work very soon as a high school teacher, for which I'm glad. Anyway, that's my credentials, and this is why I do it. I start out with the Iron Age, because I know the Iron Age. I know the Iron Age. What a racket. Anyway, I frankly have forgotten most of what I knew about the Bronze Age, so we start with the Iron Age, which I know something about, and as we go along I will hopefully learn more about the Bronze Age. Otherwise I can recommend the Danish TV series Historien om Danmark, which should be able to be found on the Denmark's Radio's homepage. That's fine, if in Danish. Anyway, I start at the Iron Age because it's what I know. The Iron Age stretched from 500 before Christ, or before our reckoning, in Denmark. It starts earlier elsewhere, but in Denmark it starts there. And it ends at about 800 AD. That's what we usually say. I personally have another reckoning, but we'll get to that in another chapter, if I ever do another chapter. We shall see. We start in the 3rd century BC, because in the 3rd century BC, society was rebuilding after the Bronze Age collapse. We have a society that will last for the rest of the Iron Age and further on, and eventually lead to what we have today. Connections to foreign powers, trade was re-established, and they lasted, in contrast to in the Bronze Age. And state building is slowly in its very infancy. So this is where we start. Oh, I have to attend to the fire. Pardon me. There we go. So, this is why. This is also where we find the first settlement from this age, where we can actually see a hierarchical organization in Hodde, a small village of today's standard, but then probably a center of some importance, because it had about 200 inhabitants, and very definitely a local chieftain of some sort. So we start there. That's called Hodde, by the way. Now, let's first have a look at the chronology of the Iron Age. And I know I write like crap. I shall put my notes online somewhere for some people to read. This should possibly be more of a podcast, but it's in an Iron Age house. I can wear Iron Age clothes, so why not? The Iron Age starts at about 500-600 BC. It is then named the pre-Roman Iron Age, or the Celtic Iron Age, named after the dominant power of the time, the Celts, from up here. It's divided into an older pre-Roman Iron Age stretching till about 300 BC, and a younger stretching to about the beginning of our reckoning, where it changes to Roman Iron Age, because then Rome does become very dominant. Again, we have an older Iron Age stretching to about 200, and a younger Iron Age, Roman Iron Age, stretching to about 400. Germanic Iron Age, Rome basically collapses. Western Rome, Eastern Rome continues. Let's not forget Eastern Rome, the Byzantine Empire, that continues to carry the inheritance of Rome. But West Rome collapses and does no longer dominate what we today call Denmark. Instead, we call it Germanic Iron Age, because this is where the Germanic tribes rise. This is where they form the nations we still have today. Well, some of them, France, for example, and Denmark. Again, we have an older and a younger, and they divide about 600 AD. And then we come to what is generally known as the Viking Age. I don't like to call it the Viking Age. I'll talk more on that later. It starts around 800 AD. So, the shift from the older Roman Iron Age till the younger Roman Iron Age. I have to get this right in my mind. I could also look at my laptop up there, but let's not. It's about the time of the Marcomannic Wars. There's the definite change there. We see, I have to consult my notes, I'm sorry. Couldn't memorize it all. There we go. The world outside the Roman Empire at this time was changing. We have tribes, coalitions, very early states, depending whether you ask archaeologists or sociologists. Gormhast, they would definitely not agree that we have an early state. Archaeologists would. We have the very earliest state formations in the Germanic area. And we have tribes that form into coalitions or early states. They're strong enough to threaten the Roman Empire and wage long wars against them, as we see in the Marcomannic Wars of Marcus Aurelius. And there is a change there. At home, in Denmark, locally, there's also a change. We see a change in construction. We also see that at this time, people are starting to have larger and larger farms, and new technology becomes very evident. This is the archaeological part of the series, and well, other people know more than me about that, they can correct me. But at home, we see that stabling becomes part of the settlement pattern. No longer are the cattle out on the field grazing in a sort of communal grazing ground and communal ownership of cattle. It is now stabled. We have for years believed that they were stabled for warmth, but as far as I know, tests, that's something I learned here at Hjemsted, test has shown it didn't give off warmth, but it was easier to defend. It's easier to raid and kill cattle on the fields of a village than it is if it's stabled inside a house. Very much so. Hence, it was stabled. It is also easier to keep private ownership of the cattle and say, this is my cattle, if it's inside a house. It's definitely the chieftain's cattle if it's in his farm. And it's number two, farmer's second chieftain, warrior, whatever he's been. It's his cattle if it's in his farm. That's how it is. I have to attend the fire a bit and have a sip of coffee. I'm sorry for that. That's the sort of downside of this lecture style, that I will be interrupting to do other things. I'll still be yapping at you though, because I talk and talk and talk incessantly. I am a teacher after all. There you go. I'll consult my note. Outside of the Danish area, at the end of the Roman Iron Age and beginning of the Germanic Iron Age, we see Rome in collapse. We see the migration period where, for various reasons, and Rome is also weakened by various reasons, and it's still being debated what it was. Personally, as a historian, I say nothing is monocausal. That's one of my axes to grind. Nothing is monocausal. But the tribes were in movement, Rome was weak, Rome collapsed. This is a period of migrations, of wars, of nation building, of local wars between small chieftains. We can see that in the book finds of, well, regional wars between parts of countries, and it's very violent. And at the end of the Germanic Iron Age, it's in a way more peaceful, because the nation states formed are being consolidated. With Nesman posits that Denmark was actually formed around 550 or so in the 6th century. He doesn't present much evidence for it, but it's an interesting theory, and he does have some indications for it, I must add. I will see if I can recall the source for this claim and post it below the video. But we see nations being formed, and at the end we definitely see them being formed. At the beginning of the Viking Age we have an area that basically is like the medieval Denmark. That is what we know as Denmark today, and parts of northern Germany, southern Norway, and parts of what is today southern Sweden. That has formed into an area, a state, an early state controlled by Godfred, who struggled with Charlemagne, and we know this from the Frankish sources. So something happens here, a consolidation. It is also in the 6th century that we hear about a king of the Danes for the first time. Oh, sorry about this. I should of course have turned the page over. My students will laugh at this when they see it, because this is like having a classroom. The Roman Empire gets occupied, there's more stability, and the wars are between kings and magnates. Chorchilaicus is the first known king of Danes, that's in the Frankish source, Gregor of Tours. He would probably be named Hugleis, or Hugleis in Danish, or pre-Norse. We also have the first phases of Dannevirke here, so we have some indications, but we also have dikes and walls across Jutland along the Hervej, the army road. Earlier, we have Olmer Diet, which is earlier, and which we have a reconstruction of here in Hjemsted. So come and see it before this place closes in October. But again, we have some uncertainty of all this because our primary sources are archaeology. There's graves, but ritual deposits and sacrifices, and we have farms and villages. Now, rituals are slow to change, so it can be difficult to say something based on them. If you watch the Danish official church today, the Folkekirken, People's Church, the priest's outfit is from the, as far as I can recall, 16th or 17th century. That hasn't changed, the ritual hasn't changed that much. So rituals are not a good source. The local villages are a good source because they change fast. With change of technology comes change in the villages. And they move a bit because they're built from wood, as this is, and they rot. So you move it a bit and you use the land that you've been building on before for all the nutrients for growing crops. But our sources are also anthropological. We have to use some anthropological method by comparison to known tribal societies. But we also have, at the start, we have written sources from Rome, like Tacitus and Caesar, or Caesar as he's probably known. And at the end we have Beowulf, Snorri, etc. Especially the latter, but also the former, must be taken with a large grain of salt. In fact, a quite spoonful, if not a shovelful of salt. There needs to be much interpretation. But in any case, this is the story of the creation of Denmark. Its political, societal, economical changes forms the basis for the society we know in the Viking Age. These changes start in the Iron Age. And as we know, Viking Age society, or early medieval society as I like to call it, basically come later medieval society, etc., etc. We have sort of an ongoing process with setbacks of various sorts. This is not a given. Things could have gone differently, but we have an ongoing process that leads us to where we are today. But we must be clear, it could have gone differently. Things could have collapsed just like they did in the Bronze Age. Nothing was set in stone, nor is what I tell you set in stone. There is no truth about history. So, The two most important changes are military. We have a change in the military organization and an economic change. Economic, as I mentioned, that's the emergence of stabling, which shows a change from the communal ownership of largely cattle to a private ownership of largely cattle, which of course gives the individual power. There will be the first divide, the first inequality that we see. But there's also a military change, and to somebody like me who's a Viking fighting reenactor, that's the most funny one, that's the most important one. I'm also a military historian, so yeah. But that military change and the change in military technology and leadership leads to a political change. There's a change in the political leadership. The military leadership becomes permanent and the military organizations becomes permanent. This is quite important because we start to see that in every village there is a chieftain and he has one or more warriors. And these warriors become more and more professionalized. So these hirds or comitatus, when you have a magnate ruling more than one village, they'll have a hirt, a comitatus, a following, a group of young men who does nothing but train for fighting. That's the first sort of craft we see, a professional craft. That's the craft of being a warrior. And you live with your chieftain, you live in his hall, you get feasted by him. We can see that in the later sources like Beowulf. That is a good depiction of it. So is the ancient Norse mythology, by the way. But it's an organization that is no longer based on kinship. It's not just the chieftain's family that lives with him and defends him. It's people from all over. If we look back to these older Norse sources that must be taken with a grain of salt, we see descriptions of how young warriors join. They travel to join the most mighty chieftain, the one that can give them most booty. This is also described in Tacitus. So it's no longer kinship based, but based on oath and on pay. The pay, of course, is in the form of treasure, like gold, silver, horses, weapons, land, and women. The first step away from a family clan-based society, as we knew from the early Iron Age, to what we know today, a hierarchic society, comes with this military change, and that cannot, in my opinion, and many archaeologists' opinion, be overstated. This is the first step. These magnates, of course, they fight, they ally, they intermarry, they fight, and slowly the small regional tribal magnates, tribal chiefs, become local kings of larger areas, and slowly a kingdom emerges, as we know from the change to the Viking Age. They fight proper battles. They combine their comitatus, their hirds, into more. They call them their allies. This is described by Niels Lund for the later Iron Age. I will go into that later. Niels Lund describes for the Middle Age, but still, I'll go into that later because it's something of huge interest to me and also of much debate. But they start to organize armies of professional soldiers, supported, of course, by people called up for service. They fight proper battles. We can see a large one fought near Skanderborg, where the losing side's weapons and gear were sacrificed in the bog at Ilorb in around 200 AD. All this happens under strong Roman influence. The Roman influence in the Roman Iron Age cannot be overstated. Because Rome was such a dominant power, it had a huge professional army that dominated Europe. And they fought on and on against the Germanics, the Germanic tribes. The Germanic tribes fought against them, but they also fought for them. It seems that the army that lost the Battle of Ilorb had been in Roman pay. There had been Roman auxiliaries. Roman used various tribesmen from inside and outside the empire in their army. So this was both in alliance with, serving with, and fighting against the Romans, but also with Rome as a role model, which we shall come to now. Which I didn't write up, so I'll tell you. These magnates would imitate the the lifestyle of the rich Romans, the Roman aristocrats. They would be drinking wine out of drinking sets. In fact, one of the most beautiful Roman drinking sets ever is found on Sjælland. And I encourage you to Google and search for pictures of the Hoby treasure. It's really fantastic. There's 2 silver vessels there, drinking vessels, with pictures from, I think it's the Odyssey. It might be the Iliad, but I think it's the Odyssey. And in the bottom of it, you see the name of the Roman procurator in Germania. It seems to have been a gift as confirming alliance between him and a magnate on Sjælland. This is fantastic. It's so interesting. I'll probably get more into that when we get to that. But this they did in life. They imitated the Roman lifestyle, and in death they got these symbols with them. They got buried with these symbols of their power, of their connections to the foreign power in the south. This changed as they consolidated their power, and also as Rome fell, of course. The ritual turned to sacrifices not towards the chieftains, the persons, but to the gods that justified this hierarchical society. We see at the late Germanic Iron Age and the early Viking Age, we have sort of in the Bracteates and the later written sources, we can see the Old Norse mythology, and the Old Norse mythology is nothing but justification for this hierarchical society of professional warriors. Odin is the ultimate warrior king. So, and he has a Hird fighting for him, all the Einherjar. So basically that's a justification for that. This grows here. And you start to see sacrifices to them. And when an army has been defeated, you don't see all their gear sacrificed. We see it in Ilorbo there. You only see 1 or 2 of the best weapons sacrificed to these gods. Anyway, in conclusion, because I've been rambling on, I like to ramble on. I can ramble on for hours, and as you can see, I get warmed up, I ramble, and I lose track. That's the way it is. So, during the Iron Age, an economic, military, and political elite emerges and ascends. They start to dominate society. They're inspired by Rome. They imitated the Roman rituals. They served in the Roman army or against the Roman army. In this part of Denmark where I am now, we can see that during the vengeance campaign for the Varusslacht, it seems that people here went and served. I'll go into that more when we get to it. And they used the ceremonial of the Roman elites. But the rituals changed. And eventually they also changed into, we have these heroic tales that they also very, very consciously used to justify their hold of power. That's what it is. It's ideology, religion, ideology, but it justified their power. And the aristocrats' station and status in society. And also we have the foundation. And the foundation myths, these heroic tales are the foundation myths of the royalty, now control of large areas of land, and eventually in what we know as today as Denmark. So let's see if I have more. No, there's no more. This is it. This will be the history of Denmark, the emergence of a state from these tribes. This will be the Iron Age part. And when I get my act together and do it, we'll have a look of the late Celtic or late pre-Roman Iron Age. Thank you for watching. I hope I wasn't rambling too much. It was a first and it was a one take. So it will be shit. But never mind. It was fun and I hope you learned something. I'll put the notes online somewhere. Thank you.